So when you look at the tummy tuck, if you've been around Jeeps and stuff like that, I'm sure you've heard it thrown out there a lot. If you've been on any kind of forums, pirate off-road, stuff like that, I'm sure you've read about it, but you're really not 100% sure what it is. It's not just raising the transmission transfer case up and slapping on a flat belly skid plate or a high clearance skid plate. There's a lot to it. I'm going to go over those today. I'm going to give you the pricing on average, what it costs, and this is obviously doing it yourself. And this is something you can do yourself. If you have some basic hand tools and you have a garage, a floor jack, stuff like that, you'll have no problem doing any of this stuff. So let's get started. So before we get started on parts, I want to go over what you're actually trying to do. So you have your engine, inline six for me. Doesn't matter if you have 4-cylinder or anything like that. Engine, transmission, transfer case. You have to remember that all three of these are connected. Your skid plate runs underneath your transmission, your transfer case. You have to remember that you can't just raise this skid plate up, because what's going to happen is the engine is not going to go with it. And what I mean by that is the engine is actually going to pivot right at the motor mount. If you look at drawing 2, this is what I have a drawing of. So this is your stock setup. This setup over here, you got your transmission, transfer case, you got your skid plate underneath, motor mount right there. This scenario here is if you would just go out, buy a skid plate, and go ahead and put it on. So let's just say for this instance, you went out and got a 1-inch drop skid plate, you raise your transmission transfer case up, you're going to have multiple issues right off the bat. The first issue you're going to have is that engine is actually going to pivot at that motor mount location. First thing you're going to see an issue with when you go to start your Jeep up, the fan is going to be under the fan shroud and who knows what else, and it's going to instantly start messing things up. Next issue you're going to have is going to be the drive shaft. So once you start trying to drive this down the road, the drive shaft is going to be at such a horrible angle, you're going to have all kinds of vibrations and things are going to start shaking and stuff like that. Next issue you're going to have, if you do have a stick, is this manual shifter is going to be so far up into the dash, you're not going to be able to shift up in the first, third, and fifth. Now that we understand that, we're going to go over the parts. So now we kind of have a better understanding of what we're actually trying to accomplish. There's a lot you need to know. There are a lot of parts that go into trying to do a tummy tuck the correct way. And honestly, there's really no other way of doing it. You either do it right or you don't do it at all. Because if you don't do it right, it's not going to work. And I can guarantee you that. So the first parts we're going to go over are going to be some of the cheaper ones and some of the easier ones to do. The very first one right off the bat is going to be a body lift. Very simple, pretty cheap. You can probably get a body lift for about 150 bucks. You don't need any crazy body lift. I see these guys run these 2- and 3-inch body lifts. No reason for it at all. In my opinion, they look ridiculous. Again, this is just my opinion. I think a body lift is necessary for certain things, like a tummy tuck. But other than that, that's all they're good for. It's a cheap lift. If you're trying to throw bigger tires on it or with just a body lift, that's the wrong way to do it. You're not gaining any better suspension, and you can't just throw bigger tires on a Jeep and expect it to be fine. There's gears, other stuff you have to worry about, and then you have to get into axles and stuff like that. We're not going down that road. All we're going to talk about is 1-inch body lift or 1 1/4-inch body lift. Is all you need. And all this is doing is giving you extra clearance in the tunnel over your transmission so you can stuff that tranny a little higher. Next thing we're going to go to is going to be a motor mount lift. Again, motor mount lifts are very simple. These are probably about 100 bucks or so, depending on what kind of brand you get. And these both are very simple to put on. I actually have videos of both of these, so make sure you check those out if you're interested to know how to put one of these on. All the motor mount lift is doing is actually going to raise your engine up 1 inch. And the reason you want to do that is because when you raise your engine and transmission up, you want to make sure that the engine is going in line with it. Like I said, 100 bucks, 150 bucks, so you're already at 250 bucks. Those are both very simple. Like I said, you can do those in your garage, no issues whatsoever. Once you get those done, now you're going to start getting in more expensive parts. You're going to want to do, if you run the 231, if you run a 241, you won't have to do an SYE kit because it runs a flange. If you're not familiar with what an SYE kit is, on the back of the transmission, on the back of the transfer case, you have what is called a slip yoke. If you get underneath your Jeep, you'll see this on the back of the transfer case. It's got some splines in here, and the drive shaft will actually go inside of this. So what we need to do is get rid of this next. The reason being is because when you raise up your transfer case and your transmission, it's going to cause this to want to actually come out of the back of the transfer case. And with that being said, you'll get rid of that. You'll go to an SYE kit. An SYE kit, called a slip yoke eliminator kit, because it's eliminating the slip yoke, is going to allow you to go to a flange setup, or not, I'm sorry, not a flange setup, a yoke setup, which is going to be the same as what you have on the front of the 231. It's also going to be what you have at your pinions on your axles. The reason you're going to go this route, for one, it can give you two options. You can go with the super short kit, like I have right here, which is going to allow you to have a longer drive shaft, because the TJ rear drive shafts are already pretty short as they are, unless you're running a stretch. And then it's going to allow you to put your U-joints in here, throw some straps on there, and don't have to worry about this coming off. This kit is not very difficult to put in. You will have to take the back of the transfer case off, change a few components out inside, and then you will have to change the cover right here that goes around where the output shaft is. Once you have that done, you'll have to go with the drive shaft. The nice thing about some of these kits, and there are some kits with various components that you're going to get, some of them come with the drive shaft, like a Tom Woods setup I know does, because that's what this is. Now keep in mind this is the rear drive shaft, but I'm just trying to show you in comparison to what kind of drive shaft you're going to need. So some of these kits will come with drive shaft. When it comes to the drive shaft, it's going to be coming with a double cardan drive shaft. If you're not familiar with a double cardan, all a double cardan means you have two U-joints at one end, and what that allows this to do, you have a U-joint here and a U-joint here, and then there's a ball right in the middle of them, and it allows this to spin like this, and it gives it a lot more movement, especially when you're flexing your Jeep out, and it's going to keep those vibrations down as well, because it's going to be able to move around a lot better rather than just one single U-joint. This, about 450 bucks, maybe closer to 500. Again, it's going to depend on who you go with, and depending on what time of year, you might be able to do some savings, depending on if it's towards Black Friday or something like that. That's a little pricey. As far as putting it in though, it's very simple. Again, this is not that hard. You actually don't even need to take this transfer case out of your Jeep. I did when I did mine, just because I thought it was a little easier to do on the bench. It is easier to put it together on the bench, the SYE kit, but you can do it underneath the Jeep. So now we have our body lift, motor mount lift, SYE kit. Now that you're raising up the transmission transfer case, the next thing you're going to have to keep in mind is your pinion angle is going to change. The reason your pinion angle is going to change is because you're pushing up the transmission transfer case. So you got your output shaft with the transfer case right here, your pinion angle right here. Right here they're good, but as you raise that up, the pinion is not going to be pointing to the output of the transfer case. So what you're going to need to do is get some adjustable upper control arms. These are about 150 bucks to 250 bucks. It really depends on what brand you go with. They can get very expensive. If you're going to go with like a Courier or something like that, you're going to be spending a little bit more money. You only need upper adjustable rear control arms. The reason is you're going to turn them. It can make your you can make your pinion come up or your pinion come down, depending on if you make that longer or shorter. You raise it up, point towards the output of the transfer case. That way everything's in a good line. Your drive shaft's not going like this and then up and then over. So you want to do that. Once you do that, the next issue you may run into is your track bar. As you turn that pinion up, the track bar, if you're not familiar with the track bar keeps the axle centered with the Jeep. I got a very good video on that if you want to check that out. So the track bar keeps it centered with the Jeep. As you move that pinion up, the track bar is going to want to kind of turn with the axle itself because it's connected to the axle and it's connected to the frame. So it's going to kind of get in a bind. And you also kind of got to watch it because depending on what kind of, if you've got a different skid plate for your gas tank, it can actually shove that into the gas tank because there's not a lot of room back there. So the next thing you might have to do is change the bracket out. I would say a bracket's going to be about $100 or so, depending on what you go with. And keep in mind, depending on how you raise this, you might not need to change all this stuff. But it's a good thing to keep in mind because more than likely you are going to have to mess with it. After you raise that, the next thing you're going to have with is probably going to be your shocks in the rear axle. The reason is because as you turn that axle up, if your shock has the cylinder down or the tube down, it's going to probably come in contact with that axle. Now if you have the shaft down, you're going to have a little bit more room between the shock and the axle and you might be okay. But keep that in mind as well. And if you have to change that, I would say them brackets aren't too overly expensive. You can also get some shock extensions to where it moves that shock a little higher off the axle. Once you get that done, the next thing you can do is go to a skid plate. There are so many different variations of skid plates out there, and it really depends on what you want out of the skid plate itself. This one in particular is an Undercover Fabs 1/4 inch thick steel 1 inch drop skid plate. This is what they call a high clearance skid plate. It works very well. It's going to give you lots of ground clearance, and it's also completely flat, which makes it really nice. All your bolts and stuff are inside here, so nothing's going to catch on the bottom of the skid plate. One thing to keep in mind on these skid plates is dependent on if you want to run a body lift or not, you might be able to get away with not running one. Some of these skid plates, this one in particular, you can run on what they call a low pro transmission mount. And what that does is it takes the transmission transfer case and pushes it pretty much right on the skid plate. So there's not a lot of room in there. What that does though, it allows you to push it up without raising the transmission as high. You might have to do a little body massaging or cutting, depending on if you're trying to go completely flat, but that is an option as well if you do not want to run a body lift. Once you raise all this stuff up, you got the transfer case transmission up, you got your drive shaft done, slip yoke eliminator kit done, body lift, motor mount lift, skid plate. The next issue you're probably going to run into is going to be the the linkage that goes to the transfer case, the 4-wheel drive linkage. If you haven't had trouble with this already, which you probably have, if you've been off-roading and especially if your vehicle is kind of in a bind or kind of twisted up a little bit, you got to put that 4-wheel drive in and you realize that it's not engaging or it moves so freely that it's not engaging. And the reason is because the linkage on these pretty much suck. There is a rod that goes across and then there's a bolt that attaches. Sometimes that bolt comes all the way out and the rod does not engage. They bind up a lot. The best thing to do is go to a cable shifter. There's a lot of brands out there. Novak's going to be one of the popular ones. What that does is it takes all the linkage away and it goes straight to cable. So you have a cable that attaches to the transfer case, runs up to the body and to your shifter. And it's freely, it moves really good, doesn't matter where you're at. And I recommend doing that regardless if you're doing a tummy tuck or not. Once you get that done, you'll be set on the transfer case, you won't have any issues with that. So keep that in mind. Now when you do the SYE kit, some of them will come with a Novak cable shifter as well. Like I said, some of these come with kits, so you really got to watch it. I know Undercover Fabs, I'm pretty sure, has the Novak cable shifter and a kit with the skid plate as well, so that'll save you some money as well. So now you're looking at $1,400 to raise the skid plate up. That's ridiculous. But is it worth it or is it not worth it? And that's something you're going to have to come up with. In my opinion, it is worth it. And not just because you're getting more ground clearance. That's not all you're getting. You're getting brand new parts on your Jeep. You're getting a better skid plate. You're getting new drive shaft, stuff like that. So you have to take that in consideration as well. The other thing you need to take in consideration is if you have a Jeep on 33-inch tires versus a Jeep on 35-inch tires, you're really only getting 1-inch ground clearance right there. But if you take that Jeep on 33-inch tires and do a tummy tuck, and even if you raise it up 2 inches, you're getting 2 inches more ground clearance versus just 1 inch by doing a tire change. So you need to take that in consideration as well when doing this. And I do 33s versus 35s because I feel like 35s is probably one of the most common tire sizes out there. And that's what tire size everybody wants to get to at some point. So you need to take that in consideration as well. The ground clearance you're going to get with this, and also the new parts you're going to get. It is a lot of money, and that's why I strongly recommend you do your research. You get these parts a little bit at a time, and install them yourself is the biggest thing. Do not take this somewhere because you're going to be spending, I would say, $2,200 to $2,500 probably easily just to get this stuff done, which is ridiculous amount to spend on just getting that amount of ground clearance. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and check out my other videos.